welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we are doing a big review of the biggest war game we've ever played. Volumetrically speaking.
Per pound, right?
Yes.
By pound.
So, it's...
Tonnage, by tonnage.
It's sprawling all over here. So this is it. This is War Room, a Larry Harris game by Nightingale Games. All right.
I don't think they heard you.
Yes. The acoustics are messed up because this is so big.
It really is, and we kind of talked about that earlier. It's almost a novelty in its hugeness.
Yeah.
Which is fine. Everybody wants a game that kind of stands out from the crowd, correct?
This is absolutely the game where if you're walking through a convention and there's 6 people sat around a big table playing it, you will stop and look.
Well,
you can't not.
It's going to draw your eye. Firstly, because of that map.
Yeah.
I've never seen a war game map like that, so that's going to draw you right in.
Yeah.
And then the cool stacks. Secondly, you're going to be like, ooh, what are those funky...
Very
cool
nice
colored,
components.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we've been to many a convention where we're like, oh, what is that? Or we stop by miniatures table to... Yes. This is going to be one that you're going to stop, stand, gawk.
Yeah, it's a spectacle,
maybe even
right?
salivate.
Absolutely.
And linger. And people are going to be like, well, what's this creepy guy here? But you're just trying to get a feel for what are they doing. And it's a spectacle. I'm not saying that in a bad way.
No, it is. It's like, I can't play this at my own house.
Well, we don't even have a I mean, this is the table we have. It's not big enough.
No.
It's not big enough hardly for the map itself.
It's not big enough for the map.
Yeah.
My table
would
need
hang
to
over.
be wider
to
be able to even fit the map on. And then, once you've got the map out, you then have this huge, like, things like a morale board.
Battle board.
There's 2 battle boards.
One for air and one, well, they're double-sided.
Right, but if you have them both set out, it's nice and easy. Then, every player has a little box which has all of their resources they're tracking. Inside it has all of their bits. And then you have a stack of cards, and those cards go on...
Another tray.
You know, a couple of different racks, just for ease of reference. So some players going to have a couple of these. And so each player's got to have a good chunk of space.
Yeah.
6 players, which you're going to want to play it with at least 5.
I don't know why you... I mean, you're just going to have to try to find people, and that may deter a lot of folks. But the experience we had with the 6 players was just amazing.
Yeah, it was so fun.
And there were things about the game that we ultimately... led to some fights. There's no fighting in the war room, by the way, gentlemen.
It led to some discussions.
Very heated discussions.
Healthy, lively discussions.
Discussions about historical accuracy, discussions about the relative power of certain units, i.e. battleships, versus arguably the king of the sea, aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
In World War II, at least. Just very interesting... the dynamic that whole thing created. And then furthermore, the mechanisms, you got to write your orders in secret. And then there's a negotiation phase, but a coordination phase where allies are talking together in the other room and the Axis is in the other room talking. I don't know. There's just a lot to like about this game. And there's a lot to draw you in, frankly.
You know, it's like with the strategy and the discussion about what we're all going to do. I love that stuff in games.
Oh, it was fantastic because there was even arguments in that. You know, I had some players that really wanted to, let's get on this. And I'm like, dude, they're kicking our butts in the Pacific. We got to figure out how to allow me to get a couple ships over there so I can start building up a resistance. I don't know. We had those arguments of Europe first.
Yes.
Or coordinated effect. And now you understand why a game like Churchill exists, where you're arguing amongst the big 3 about those very same issues.
And it's all very important, but it's what do you do first? Because if you split everything evenly, you'll have a lot of mediocre nothingness and probably get destroyed.
Yeah, it needs to be coordinated.
Somewhere you might lose this, but take that, and then you got to tell here. Oh, so again,
we had a lot of mediocre nothingness for... I think the Allies really struggled in our... We played twice.
Yeah.
The first game we only played for what?
We played 3 turns.
It took about 3 or 4 hours just because we were learning the systems.
Yeah, and I think most sides had made cataclysmic mistakes.
Critical errors.
Just learning the strategies and what you're doing. And,
or not even learning the strategies, forgetting to write down an order that moved one of your stacks to where it could defend.
Or writing an order down twice. Or writing an order wrong. And those things have very serious consequences in the game.
Well, yeah.
So that's one of the things I want to talk about is this is a pre-programmed movement game.
And it's glorious, frankly. It does what it is intended to do very, very well.
Basically, so you kind of discuss between your allies what you're going to do, and then you write down, you have, generally speaking, 9 orders. I think Italy's got 6, right? So does China. But most of we got 9 orders.
And China has 6, and you're only going to use 2 of them. Maybe.
At most.
Possibly 3.
But, so you will have... all of your stacks of units have like a designation on them.
Yeah.
And you will write that designation and then the target space they're allowed to move to. And so the route that they take isn't necessarily important as long as they can get there legally when it's their time to move.
It is important only because if an enemy stack goes first and cuts into your expected path, you ain't moving to where you thought you were moving.
But it's possible, like at sea, that you could just go around.
It's true, as long as there's an eligible route, right? Yes.
So, but what you're doing is you're picking an end goal, and you're picking the unit that's going to try to do that.
Yep.
And you got 9 orders. Most of the time, you're going to use all 9. It's very rare that you don't. And then, as part of that, you're going to secretly bid your oil, which is a very precious resource.
It's almost too scarce to even consider bidding.
You bid oil for turn order. It's all secretly.
Yeah.
So if you desperately need to go first, are you going to throw in a ton of oil?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to gamble putting in less oil because you need that oil later on in the turn to build units? Again, your resources are stretched very thin in this game. And then everyone reveals their stuff. You arrange the turn order, and when you win the initiative, you get to choose where you go.
Yeah, it's not that you necessarily go first; you get to choose.
And I always like that.
Yeah.
Because if you desperately need to see what someone else is doing, I don't know why you would do that, because your orders are pre-programmed, you can't really react.
Right.
But you could cancel certain orders and do things. I guess that's why you would do that. But you choose where you go in the turn order. And so you arrange the turn order, and then you hand off your orders to someone else, and they read them out so that you can't lie and fudge and cheat.
Which my honor was hurt. I would never do that.
Yeah.
But that was cool, though. It was cool.
They're covering their bases.
It was pretty neat. That concept was pretty interesting.
Yeah, so your enemy reads off your orders, and it's this unit to this space. And if an order is illegal or becomes illegal, it is cancelled. It just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And it is really easy to miswrite orders. Oh. It is really easy to forget to write a really important order. I did that at least once. Yeah. Where you think you've got it all covered because you're moving your front lines up and you've got all these support units to fill the gaps that you're making. I forgot to move some reinforcements
to plug a hole.
So I as the Russians took back Ukraine basically, but then I didn't have a second wave because they were back in Moscow, and I was like, oh, this is so bad. Yeah. So,
well, and with
really important stuff.
With my experience with that, I played the U.S. and Japan. More often than not, when I made a mistake, I wrote an order 2 times.
Right,
which is absolutely ridiculous.
A different kind of punishing.
You're kind of going through your orders, and then you start looking at the board. You're like, oh, I forgot that, and you start erasing some stuff, and then you're like, well, why did I do that? And sometimes your plans get a little muddled.
Yeah.
And you ultimately go like, oh, I need to move this guy there, and you write that again, and it's like, oh gosh, why did I do that? Well, one of the things that I thought was cool, and I actually never used this map. This is like a little insert or inset map of the entire world.
Yeah, there's 2 of them.
There are 2 of them.
There's one on the back of this.
I never used it because I was just looking at the board, but you probably should use this because it's a little more secretive.
Well, yeah, because the pieces are so big, you often are covering up a lot of your numbers, especially in the European mainland.
The crowded areas.
It's very crowded, so they give you these little boards which are on the back of the pretty decent play aids.
Yeah.
Which just have sequence of plays on them. So you can always reference these for the numbers, but it's still, you're kind of looking like, it's this one, it's this one, it's this one. I've still messed up one doing that.
Oh, I think it's inevitable, but I also think that, to me, accomplishes what they were trying to do, to show the difficulties in coordinating across multiple fronts, multiple oceans, multiple continents, these coordinated actions, all from a little command bunker in, the Admiralty in London,
Right.
or from Washington. And it's just, to me, that was very well done.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly right, because it is very rare in a war game that you make such a, almost an easy mistake.
Yeah,
You sent a fleet somewhere where they weren't meant to go.
Right.
That would, never happen
In a normal war game.
In a hex encounter game where all this information's open.
An I go, you go kind of setup where I can see everything.
Yeah, you can make errors in maybe overcommitting somewhere or doing something. You can make tactical errors, but this one, it felt very much more impactful.
Yes.
Like a percentage of your orders are now gone.
Yeah. And also because you only have, the big countries have the 9, the smaller countries, Italy
and China.
And China, which once again, China really only needed 2.
Yeah.
That was one of the issues I had with the game. I thought China was an absolute non-presence on the board after playing them and being crushed, and then also after absolutely destroying them as the Japanese.
Yeah, it's a tough.
I don't want to get off
game,
but it's that concept of the bigger countries have more resources, more ability. They get 9 orders. 9 orders ain't enough.
No, even then it's not. Yeah,
the U.S. was splitting their orders between 2 theaters, so that meant you could only use 3 to 5 orders in one theater because you can't ignore the other one.
Yeah.
I couldn't ignore Europe and say, I'm going to move all my boats and my planes around because I needed to help the European allies to get a foothold on Africa and put pressure on France and do everything. I don't know. There's just a lot of really very cool and very tense decisions that had to be made in this game. And I think that's really why it kept we played this thing all day.
Yeah, we played 2 games of it, and it was literally all day. It was more than all day.
I think we started at 9 a.m. and I think we finished at 10 or 11 p.m.
Yeah.
And we really didn't finish because I think everybody had decided that, these 2 factions had become too powerful.
Yeah, it's reasonable. Like, playing out an entire game of this, you would need probably 2 days.
There's no doubt. Because the victory conditions are, allies got to have 2 capitals, right?
Yeah.
And the Axis got to have
2 capitals.
2 capitals. Moscow's probably I don't even want to say easy because it isn't easy.
No, it's not.
But where's your second one going to come from?
Exactly.
UK's going to be tough.
But that's probably the easiest one.
It is. Washington's almost impossible.
You're never going to take that.
I don't even know how Washington would even be approachable, but that concept, you're gonna have to play it over 2 days.
Yeah.
This is a convention game for sure, where you're gonna line this thing up on a table, you're gonna play it all day one day for 14, 15 hours, you're gonna come back the next day and finish it up at 14 or 15 hours.
Yes, I agree.
And you're gonna have some diehards. And our group we were all in.
Yeah, man.
I think everybody was enjoying it, they were engaged. I could see on some faces, because of the situation,
right,
they were starting to become desperate and really downtrodden. In our second game, I hate to say it, and I don't say that I was Japan and I was untouchable. I don't know that anyone ever was going to be able to break my defenses and get where they needed to go.
Or if they were, it was going to be in 18 hours' time, right?
Yeah, and I don't even know how, because my oil is so protected, as it was historically, and they just have such powerful units. It's just, when you build powerful units because you have the oil, it's a cycle. But lots to like. I enjoyed it immensely. Yeah. There were a couple things that I didn't like. The one that we keep talking about, the difference in units seems a little, I don't want to use the word half-baked because I would never accuse a designer like Larry Harris, who has done a lot of these games. I just don't know what he was trying to model with the differences in some of the naval units. The battleships are ridiculous.
The battleships are incredibly difficult to kill.
They literally, is it 3 hits?
You have to do 3 hits to them, 1, 2, and then they're dead. But
there's only 1 result on the die that's going to hit them. That's the red thing. 1 out of 12 results. You can also maybe
yeah.
hit them with the black or the white, depending on if you have the advantage.
Yeah, a white can only hit 1 in 3 times. They have to be in the damage box to take
Right.
that. A black one's a wild, so you have to have combat advantage to be able to do that.
So it boils down to the most you're going to have is 2 to 3 results on a 12-sided die. It's hard.
And then you stick all your cruisers in the escort, and they're just going to absorb those hits first, right?
Which
so,
was a very cool mechanic.
Yeah, it was nice. So that's like... we learned from the first game that the battleships are so strong as a screening force, and so everyone was just building battleships and no one was building any aircraft carriers.
Well, and the other concept I had that I didn't like was aircraft carriers only had one plane.
Yeah.
So you had an entire aircraft carrier, which really, frankly, their dice aren't great.
No.
But they had this little plane token flying around. I thought to myself, that maybe represents 10 planes. Most aircraft carriers had 30 to 40.
At this scale, it doesn't, right? At this
Well-
scale, that one carrier represents a carrier fleet, basically.
Oh, you're right. It's multiple
And it's multiple
carriers.
squadrons.
Yeah.
And
It seemed underpowered to me. That seemed underpowered.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have to have, if you have a couple, like if you had 2 or 3 carriers and you have them in a separate stack and they're screened behind a fleet that's going to be in the combat,
They
then
can
they
launch
toss
their
their fighters
planes.
in. That's where their power is.
Yeah.
But doing that and coordinating that is very order intensive.
Well, only
Right.
it is if you haven't organized it, but if you've organized it, you can put all your carriers in the same stack, and that's one order to do that. To
Right.
launch all those planes, one space to join a
Well,
battle.
they launch for free anyway, those two.
But you still got to activate those stacks, don't you?
No.
Okay.
They always launch, but you have to, the problem is you have to get them in place, as well as having your battle fleet in place to screen them.
Yeah.
And then you can't just leave them naked, because they'll slip some subs in and you're in trouble.
Right.
So you got to put other, like, it's very, very intensive to do that kind of thing. So that was that was an interesting discussion that we had about what's what.
We had a discussion about the time scale of the game and the reality of being able to build 2 battleships a turn. It's just not necessarily feasible.
Right.
You know, just because it takes, what do those things take? A year to 2 years to build?
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but it's a long time.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a long
probably,
time.
Yeah, at least.
So we had that discussion. Then we had discussion about the dice results. And then we had discussion about their relative power to other units that we thought from reading history and seeing, a la aircraft carrier, I was like, I'm not going to build aircraft carriers. I'm going to build battleships. And that bothered me a little bit just because I want a game to be historical. And I felt that created some ahistorical behavior.
And whilst that's true, this is also a massive beer and pretzels game. Right?
Yeah, it's not supposed to be crunchy, but
I think it takes itself too seriously.
No, I don't.
Right?
Yeah, that is not. It's just like Axis and Allies. Axis and Allies doesn't take itself too seriously. It is what it is. It's meant to be fun and playable. I think this game is kind of meant to be fun and playable with a little more crunch.
Yeah, but it's just, and that's what it boils down to. Is we're having all these discussions about the historiosity of this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? It's not the most accurate simulation. It's not trying to be. It's trying to be a big game.
It doesn't
sitting
purport
around
itself to be
having some fun.
OCS but so the other thing, while we're talking about those things that we didn't necessarily agree with, the one thing that we also had a lot of discussions with was the amphibious landing rules and the way movement of troops into position to make those amphibious landings. It was I thought it was a little bit too difficult.
It's very difficult.
And it allowed people to, once again, ahistorically, basically vacate France. Correct? Move all your units from France towards the East Front because, guess what? The moment he tips his hand that I have to defend France because they're coming for it, I can move a couple stacks back. Well, it depends on where you move stuff, but
yeah, and that's where you get into. You have to do the strategic bombing to blow up the rail lines, so they can't slip them back
important.
in. There's a lot of layers to this game as well, which I appreciate for that kind of thing, and it gets cagey.
Yep.
But because of the type of game that it is, you can take some big gambles like this.
You can.
It's like an A&A, right?
Yeah.
You can do pretty wild and crazy things, but
in Axis and Allies, I never remove my 7 stack of infantry from France, from
Yeah.
Western Europe. I had to have that there. In this game, both times, the German player vacated France, and I thought to myself, that feels odd.
Well, maybe we had a bad UK player.
I don't know. Maybe I wasn't a UK player, but the other concept was the other thing we discussed was this concept of rigid requirements to start the game. It's like every time you're going for Egypt on the map,
You have to take Alexandria. If you don't do it,
got to. If you don't, the Axis can't, one, get the resources they need, and two, the Allies are just going to build up a fortress down there and come for you across the Mediterranean.
And once the Axis do take it, well, it is really hard to take it back too.
It's almost nigh impossible.
And then it opens up the Middle East.
Yep.
Which
is also dangerous.
A lot of games have kind of like, here's your opening test. Here I stand the same way, right?
I think every game has that. There's certain attacks you're going to make in every East Front game. When you're looking down the line, you're comparing your numbers, and you're going to attack here, 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 and here. And I understand that, but that was also a point
Just
of
know
discussion.
that's what you're getting yourself into, right?
Japan, also the thing that I didn't like was China was so weak, because I felt like they weren't supported by the Allies like they were in some of these other games we've played.
Yeah.
Think back to Axis and Allies. China didn't have a lot of guys in those 4 or 5 areas, but they had several U.S. planes.
And it was hard to
flying tigers, right?
Yeah, you can't root those out when they're defensively in that game.
But in this game, because it was 1942, those planes were gone.
Yeah.
So that was another interesting thing. I thought that the fate of China was sealed, and within 3 turns, they're not going to exist anymore. And then guess what happens? Japan focuses on, the Urals and Kamchatka,
they'll break the pact, the non-aggression pact, and then...
To me, that is, I don't know, it's going to happen every time, because there's nothing you can do as China to really change that fate. China's a very interesting faction because of the way they recruit, but there's really nothing.
But
I'm going to get 3 guys.
Yeah, it's so slow. That's the problem.
And you saw the stacks I brought across as Japan. I mean, I had a stack of 8 units, which is the max coming across.
And I think that's their intention. China is there to tie up Japanese orders and troops.
To hold them, yeah.
But
to me, they're just...
what effect?
Well, but to me, they're just a little too weak to really accomplish exactly what you're...
Yeah.
Which I understand, it's a choice. It's a choice in the design. I'm okay with it. Ultimately, it played out. But I remember as playing China, I was like, why am I even going through this? This should be a non-playable faction, and they should just every round be recruiting the 3 or 4 units they got, and
I would never play the 7 players, because the 7th player has to play China, and they literally don't do anything.
You're going to sit there for 3 hours and be destroyed.
Right, and then you've got 18 hours of watching your friends play.
Yeah, because you don't have anything to do. So, overall, there was a lot to like about this game. There really was.
Yeah.
From the production to the gameplay to the different interesting elements to the way it caused me to think differently. I had a good time.
Yeah, when you get to the battles, you just line up all your units on the battle board, this way or this way. You do an air combat first, and then you do a ground combat, and you roll the number of dice with the units you've assigned.
Yeah.
And this is truly a bucket of dice game.
Well, you're going to be rolling, 30 dice is the max.
30 dice is the max.
30 12-siders.
You roll them in sets of 10, which I actually really liked the way that they did that.
It added to the tension.
Well, what it does is it allows people, especially in naval combat, that's what allows submarines to escape.
Yeah.
You chuck 10 dice, and you just color match, right? If I roll yellows, I do yellows, blues, greens, reds. And then you move over to the damaged box and the eliminated box. But if you've got these subs, they go into a dive box, and if you can't finish them off, they just dive and slip away, and they come back next turn.
Yeah.
But you chuck 10 dice, you resolve them. They chuck 10 dice, resolve them. I chuck 10 dice, resolve them. Then you roll, whatever's left. You got 8 dice, you chuck them. So when you get into the big doom stacks fighting each other, you roll so many dice, almost everything's going to die. It is rare.
For the most part,
but battleships.
The bigger units, the battleships. And more often than not, tanks, because greens are a little more rare.
But they're rare in that you will have fewer of them.
Yeah, and you will. You'll only have 2 or 3
when
units.
You roll 30 dice and you're hitting on blacks,
4
greens, and whites, you'll do it.
Yeah.
You will. And wiping stacks is so painful from a resource standpoint.
Oh, you can't replace them.
Yeah, in those you'll be able to replace maybe half of those.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that aspect where everyone starts super strong and you'll just kill each other to death, and then you'll come back a little bit weaker, but they'll be weaker as well.
Yeah.
And it shows that kind of attrition and war weariness in a way as well.
And I think the couple times where battles didn't go as expected really swung the pendulum.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you remember in our second game, Operation Torch was literally destroyed by the Italians and the Germans in West Africa.
Yeah.
It was ugly.
It was
terribly ugly, and it changed things for the next 3 turns.
Yeah, basically all the Italians died, and all of the Allied landing forces died. They
And there was like
mutually
one or
killed
two,
each other.
one German unit left.
Yeah,
No,
I think one unit, German, like moved in later because they were still in Libya.
But that's not supposed to happen, though. The way it's set
But
up.
it did, though.
It did. It happened, but
Right.
it was so interesting to see that. I remember my jaw dropped.
But that stuff set back the Allies significantly.
Oh, yeah.
Because now they've got to rebuild all those troops and have made no progress.
It takes forever.
Yeah.
And that was one thing I do. Like, I like this in games where distances to me seem measured and calculated by the designer.
Yes.
Even to the point where a couple of connecting C boxes, there's a couple different ways to get to where you're going, which is important for things like subs when you're trying to evade. But for men and materiel trying to get across and attack, you got to move in this direction. But it's so interesting the way that those are lined up. So movement was very challenging. It took at least 2 turns to get from the United States to the UK, 3 turns to get to Africa.
Yeah.
So it's a long game.
Yes.
You're building towards this, and that was something we learned. I was like, I got to move a couple stacks now in the first round, and I didn't. I should have done that.
What I'll do is I'll show you the board so you can see some of this because the movement is... I enjoy that too.
Yeah.
And we'll show you how the combat works, and we'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So, here's a look at the map, and, well, this is half of the map. I physically cannot fit this whole map on my table, and we don't have it all set up. I had to... I'm kind of doing this afterwards, and setting this all up is... It takes a while. There's a lot of stuff to it. This is not a small game. I just want to show you how some of the mechanics work. There's some pretty good play aids. So we got a reference which has the phase sequence. You just kind of go through this each round, and you just keep going until the game ends. Basically, these are very helpful. And what's also good about these, so there's one about like the details of combat as well. But on the reverse of these, you have a mini version of the map each. And they also have all of the, and it shows the identification for all the different zones. And that stuff's really, really important in this game. So having these extra handy, as well as just looking at the map, is important. So there's a lot of iconography on the map. So the map's divided up into these kind of large sea zones. This is obviously I2, Indian Ocean 2 space, Indian Ocean 7 space, right? The Mediterranean, M2, M3, the Atlantic, A15, Pacific, P18 over here, for example. So those are all divided up. Those are fairly standard, right? Those are just spaces that your ships can move into. And it is interesting, right? How they have divided up the map and how that changes the length of journeys. So you can't go from A19 to I13, and you have to move 3, these are 3 spaces to get up here. It just shows you the way that the map is kind of smushed in a way to get it all on. The way they divide up the sea zones is still, appropriate for the distance that you have to go in areas, so to speak, even though physically it might be smaller. So, the land masses, however, are divided up into regions, countries, nations, depending on what we're looking at. But so each of them has an identification. So India is B18, for example, whereas the Sudan is B6. Caucasus is R6. And Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary all in one area is G4. So those are identification numbers. Again, those are referenced on here. That is very, very important for when you are writing orders. You write orders on this pad of which you have 1 billion sheets. And we'll show you that because you reference which area you're moving from and which area you're moving to, basically. So that's that aspect of it. Each of them also has other numbers in there as well. And so if you've got factory symbols in them, that denotes that units can be built into those areas. You cannot, if you purchase a unit, you cannot build it into the Middle East. You cannot build it into Turkmen and Uzbek. There's no factories to do that. There's no industry located there. When you build things into land areas, you can build them into places where there are factories, but only equal to the number of smokestacks on the factories. And at first I thought that'd be pretty irritating, but it actually works just fine. Like, you'd be moving them around. Oh, how many stacks is this? You got to pay attention. But so the Volga, this is where Stalingrad is. You can put 2 into Volga. In Moscow, you can put 5 into Moscow. In the Ukraine, you can put 4 into Ukraine. Greater Germany, a whole bunch. Great Britain, a whole bunch. France, a whole bunch. In the US, which is off map, you can imagine has an absolute ton of them as well. In Japan, basically everything goes into the home islands. They don't have any other industry elsewhere that they have access to, basically. You can see there's also these rail connections. You can use those for strategic movement, but you can't end in an area with enemy units. So you can normally you can only move kind of a limited amount, but if you can use the rail movement, you can move a long way, but you can't get into combat doing it that way. And then there's also a number of other resources that are on your kind of spaces. So we have this blue is an iron resource. This yellow is like an other strategic resource, and this red is oil. So there's these 3 colors, red, blue, and yellow, and you track those on a little pegboard. And those are important because you'll use those to purchase units at the end of a turn. That's kind of the core of what you're looking at on the board. And then the board will be quite literally covered in stacks of these units. I've just got a couple here just so that we can look at them. And these are really, really nice plastic pieces, and they are fully stackable. And then your country has a cap on there. So the pieces are generic: yellow for infantry, blue for artillery, green for armor. And then you just pop so this is 29th. You pop that on top of that stack. This is now a Russian stack of those things that are in there. Real simple, they stack nicely. It's a very clean system. Because of how big these are, you can see at a glance what's in the stack and how many there are of it. Same with this German stack here, for example. But, for example, on the East Front, this will be very crowded. There's a whole bunch of that. But it's still pretty easy to see those things. That was one thing that I was worried about. Did not have an issue with it in the first place. So then, how do you do all your moves? Why is that important? Well, let's take a little look here. What you're going to do is, on this pad of paper, in this section, you're going to write down your orders. So, for example, and you do this all secretly. It's great. You have a planning phase with your allies where you kind of discuss what you're going to do, and then you write down and you give orders to each of your stacks. So for one of these orders, I would put 29th up here, and underneath the arrow, I would show the destination space that it's going to. So if I wanted to go to the Ukraine, I would put 29th, and then G6. And so then, when that would happen, I would move into G6. If I wanted to attack Belarus, I would put 29th, and then I would put G7, because that's the designation here. But everyone else is doing all of their orders, and everyone writes them all simultaneously and secretly. And as part of that, you then bid oil to see who goes first. And that's very important because oil is a very sparse resource in this one. So you don't have a lot of it. You need it to build tanks, you need it to build planes, you need it to build basically anything that isn't infantry and artillery. If you want to build aircraft carriers and battleships, you need a ton of that stuff. Armor can get quite expensive if you're churning through it, so do air forces. So, that already it's how much oil do I bid versus how much do I keep to be able to spend on units later. Already a whole thing. How much do I want to be the attacker? I really want to go first, so I got to put a whole bunch of oil into it. Very, very interesting stuff. I really, really like that aspect of the game. But what happens is everyone writes down all of their orders, and then you tear off the sheet, and then you hand it to one of your opponents. So everyone kind of exchanges them, and then you go in. You decide the turn order, and that's tracked on this kind of middle bit, right? So let's say Germany bid the most oil. They would then choose where they go, probably to go first. You almost always, if you're bidding lots, you're trying to go first. Then they. So you establish all of the different turn orders of who's going where, and then ties, it's random. And then starting with the first player, you then read off their orders. So if you want to go first, if you want to be the attacker and have all of your moves go off, you got to make sure you go first, if that's very, very important to you. So if Germany goes first, the British player, for example, is going to have this piece of paper, and they're going to read them off, and they're going to say, this unit goes here, this unit goes here, this unit goes here, this unit goes here, this unit goes here. And in the rules, it's like, if you mess up your orders, if you put it to the wrong area, there's no takebacks. There's no, oh, I meant to send it this way. You messed up. Like, it goes to where you sent it to. You goofed. Or if you put in an illegal order, you can cancel it, or you can, or it doesn't go off. You kind of get an option there. You can always cancel orders, but canceling orders, you just do nothing. At least you don't throw units away. But so that's important because, you know, if this guy moves into Leningrad, and then on my one, I had tried to go first because I was trying to pin him in Belarus, you get this like swirling mass of they attacked here and I counterattacked. I really, really like that aspect of it. Or if for example, you know, this unit moved into Bryansk and this unit was, you know, over here into, let's say it was in like over here trying to protect the Japanese border, and I had given this a strategic move to Bryansk, I now cannot complete that because it ends in an enemy unit. So I then have to cancel that order. This guy is stuck here. Instead of if I'd have just, you know, tried to start moving them slowly. If you try to skip the system, you can block people by going before them and trying to cut off their strategic movement. So there's lots of canny moves that you can do within all of that, and resolving all the moves is hilarious because sometimes you mess it up or someone does something unexpected and everyone around the table is like, oh. Once all the moves are done, you just then resolve all the battles where there are units together, and that's where you fish out the battle board, and all of these units get transferred to the battle board, and you have a fight. And you resolve all the air combats first, which we don't have any units for, and then you do all the ground combats. And that's important because if you've got bombers and fighters and you set them to ground, they can attack and destroy some of these units before combat's initiated. So we're going to put the Axis on the Axis side. You put that little Axis command here to denote who's who. And we have one armor unit, and we have one artillery unit, and we have one infantry unit. Oh, we have two infantry units. Okay. And the Russians have 2 artilleries and 4 infantries, which is quite good. So in this instance, what we're going to do is and then you choose the stances of all your units. If you want your infantry to be offensive, they will roll 2 dice each, but they can only take 1 hit before they're dead. If they are in a defensive posture, they roll 1 dice each, but they can take a hit, and then you have to take a second hit before they die. So you get more hit points, fewer dice, more dice, fewer hit points. Effectively is how you want to think about it. Your artillery, you can do it ground. It's going to get 2 dice. If you set it to anti-air, it can get 2 dice in the air phase, which we don't have, and 1 dice in the ground phase. So we'll stick it to ground because we're having an air phase. And then armor is very much the same thing. If I go offensive, they're going to roll 4 dice each. 1, 2 hit points. If I put them in defensive, they're going to roll 2 dice each. They can roll 1 in the air phase if they want, but they have 1, 2, 3 hit points before they're dead. So let's say the Germans are attacking. Well, the Russians are then going to stick everyone in defensive because they just want to survive, and they'll put the artillery in ground attack. So they're going to roll fewer dice, but it's going to be harder to kill them. And let's say the Germans want to go offensive, so they're going to roll lots of dice here. We'll keep that there, and we'll do 1 and 1, just to keep it interesting. And then we get to the rolling dice phase. And there's a ton of dice in this game. And we have these D12s, which have colored symbols on, which match the colors of the units. There's also black and white faces. Blacks are wilds, and whites are also... Whites can eliminate units that are in this damaged box. Got this kind of white triangle to remind you. However, and this is where some of the game gets real interesting, only the faction with force advantage can use that. Or so, for example, we have force advantage as the Germans because we have more unit types, more different colors than the opponent. They've got more units, but we have more different types. This is our combined arms bonus. It means that when the Russians roll, whites and blacks are misses. When we roll, they have an opportunity to do things. So how you compose your forces is important. If you just buy a ton of infantry and just have stacks and stacks of infantry, things might go very poorly for you. So and then what you do is you just roll 10 dice, they roll 10 dice, we roll 10 dice, you roll 10 dice. And you can roll a maximum of 30 dice, which when you get into lots of battleships, lots of tanks, is important. Your dice do cap out. So we're going to roll 4 dice from the armor unit. We're going to roll 2 dice from the artillery unit, and we're going to roll 1 dice from our defensive infantry and 2 dice from our offensive infantry. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So we just chuck all of these, and then we see what we do. And fire is simultaneous, so the Russians will get to fight back. So we rolled 1, 2, oops, that was yellow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. That was very interesting. We rolled 5 yellow hits. So you go 1, 2, and you have to kill guys before you eliminate more, I believe. 1. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was all the yellows. We didn't score any blue hits, so we didn't do any damage to the artillery. These greens are wasted because they don't have any tanks to take the green hits. And then I have 2 whites. Well, this 1 white can finish off this guy, and this last white doesn't do anything because there's no one in one of these white damaged boxes. So we killed 3 guys doing that. And then they get to shoot back. So they have 4 dice from artillery, and then they've got 4 dice from having 4 infantry. And again, those are calculated before any dice are chucked. So I chuck my dice, and we look at the... you go from bottom to top, it's easiest. So we go 2 yellows. So do we kill this guy outright, or do we kill this guy and wound this guy? Well, we can't use the whites and the blacks. Those are misses for us. So we might as well just kill this guy. No, we shouldn't. We should kill this guy, and we should damage this guy. That's what we should do. And I'll show you why here in a second. Oh, because we have a 3rd yellow. I didn't see that. So they're both dead. Great. We did score 2 blues. 1, 2. And we scored 1 green, which puts this green into this box. Oh. So that's all the dice that are chucked. We then put these guys back on. They go back onto the map, and they are... I'm just throwing everything everywhere. They are stuck, locked in combat. So let's say they were in here. Great. We did a lot of attrition to the Germans who can't afford to take it. But before I get my green tank back, I have to pay a resource to keep him. So because he was in this damaged box, I have to spend one of my OSRs, peg down 1 space, to get him back. You have to pay resources to repair guys, basically, to get him back up to full strength. Or you can obviously just let him die. So your resources, again, it's another way to expend those. It's another thing that you have to take care of. But that's... Then the units that all died, you then take those, and they go onto this morale board, and then so you look at which country you are. So the Russians, we lost these guys, and this one, and the Germans, no, it was the other way around, wasn't it? They just lost those guys. And the Germans, we lost 2 dudes and infantry. Once you've done all of the fights, and this is all filled up, because a lot of guys are going to die in this, you then calculate your stress. So each infantry gives you 2 stress. So that's 6 stress for the Russians. On 0 to 18 stress, nothing happens. On 20 to 34, you gain a stress token, and a stress token will be placed here. And then if you ever get 5 stress tokens, that's a lot of moving parts in this, you go down on this status. So you go from an acceptable level of stress, you go down to labor and civil unrest, which means you start losing resources every turn. From there you get to dysfunctional infrastructure, supply lines disrupted, economic collapse, things get really bad for you. And as you take these penalties, your nation starts to kind of collapse, bad things happen, you lose resources, you lose the capacity to do rail movement, units start to leave, you stop gaining money. It's really awful, and that's how that aspect of the game kind of goes. But to get there, you have to cross these gates a number of different times, and each different nation has different thresholds, which is very interesting with how that plays out. So I know this isn't much, but Nightingale does have a really nice set of videos explaining basically all the rules of the game and teaching how to play. I would recommend checking that out as well, if it's something you're interested in, but we had a blast with this. We'll wrap up with some final thoughts. So let's look at the map. Well,
Did we even get the map in the entire shot?
no.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
It's not possible.
No camera's big enough for that. I really enjoyed this game.
Yeah, I think
Had a blast with it.
I did too. I liked everything about our discussions. I liked everything about our experience. There were some things about the mechanics that I thought, oh, this could have been tightened up, or this could have been a little different. But don't we do that with almost every game?
Whilst that's true, in a game like this, understanding that this is extremely fancy Axis and Allies, which I know that they hate when we say that, but it's that style of game in that I'm not looking for the most accurate historical simulation. I'm okay hand-waving certain things, and because we're playing a big game,
it's about
having
the
a good
experience.
time.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate experience game, right?
Agree.
So think about this. When's the next time I'm going to play this?
Well,
It's going to have to be a big convention.
Yeah, because you can't
or
get
another big gaming weekend.
How are
like
you going
that.
to get 6 people together? It's just almost impossible. And 6 people that are willing to spend a day and a half to 2 days playing it is also fairly difficult. But I would say most gamers need to have this thing on their shelf, just because it's that spectacle. It's that,
or someone in your group has to have it.
yeah, because you want access to it. I would love to play this thing like once a year and just kind of see how that develops and our experience changes and grows. Because I think we had great discussion after our second game, and everybody was like, okay, maybe you could try this. And isn't that what these games are about?
I think, yes.
Development of strategy, discussion of alternatives. How does it compare to history? I loved that discussion. In fact, I made the comment, dang it, we should have turned the video on, because there was some really good discussion going back and forth from some very intelligent people. Not you and I.
No.
There were other intelligent people that were giving a lot of good insights, and I was like, those are great
I'm sat in the
points.
corner like eating beef jerky dribbling.
Well, yeah, because I was tired, frankly. But you talked about this in the video, or the when you looked up at the map. That combat system is very cool.
It's fun, yeah.
It's fun, but I like the decisions you have to make with, am I going to put my infantry on defensive?
Yeah.
Because it takes 2 hits to kill them, and I've really only got 4 infantry, and that's all I got here. Or do I want to surprise the heck out of my opponent, go on the offensive, and all of a sudden my 4 infantry turn into 8 dice, and I might kill something.
Yeah.
Those were great choices that I found very interesting, that I had to think about quite a bit.
And some of the decisions, it's like there's a very obvious tipping point, right? If you're heavily outnumbered, you will die. So you may as well go on the offensive.
Try
do
to
as many wounds to them as possible. Make them pay for it.
Try to
right?
bloody their nose. The other thing I loved about the air combat was you had the choice of air combat with the other air units, or you could forego that and really go for the ground combat to really make a difference.
But then the other guys in the
They're
air
gonna
combat,
kill you.
they're trying to shoot you down before you can roll in the land combat.
So
it's
those,
very interesting stuff.
Those were those bombers were also really awesome. they were the first thing that were always taken out in air combat, right? Or attempted to, because they roll so many
Right,
dice.
but you screen them with the green fighters. They make
Yep.
them red, so they're really hard to hit.
Yep,
And
yep.
I really like that. If you get a couple bombers, those will make a big difference.
2 bombers, 6 dice. I mean, that's going to make a huge difference in ground combat. So that battle board, very well done.
Yeah.
I enjoyed those concepts. I enjoyed the differences in the units.
Yes.
And frankly, there were times where we all know tanks are important. I'm going to be honest. What I learned by the end of the second game is tanks are indispensable. Every time I had 3 or so tanks out of my 8 stack of units, I did amazingly. 1, they couldn't get hit.
It was very hard to kill tanks.
Very hard to kill them. And 2, they're rolling 6 dice.
They roll 4 apiece, I think.
Yeah, 8. So if I had 3 tanks, that's 12 dice.
Or if you put
That's
them
a
on
lot.
defensive, they're rolling 2 dice.
And taking 2 hits.
But yeah, it's much harder to kill them.
There were just some very fascinating nuances that I think we learned throughout the plays that I'd love to go back now after 2 games and be like, I'm going to start doing this a little better. Artillery's also fascinating because they can shoot at
Yeah, you can either make them AAA or
Ground.
combat. And
very fascinating.
AAA is it's cheeky.
It is.
If you've got a number of artillery, you stick a bunch of artillery in France, they're going to shoot down all that strategic bombing that's coming in.
And that was what I liked because I had to start thinking like a commander.
Yep.
I only had a limited number of assets. Is it better to buy 3 artillery guns or 1 tank and 2 infantry? Because you know what? If I shoot a plane down, I won.
Yes.
That was a victory for me because I only lost a couple of things. Yeah, I lost the territory, but 1, he's got nothing to take it really with, and 2, how's he going to replace that?
Replacing the plane is very expensive.
And those were the decisions that I started to make, and I really, really enjoyed that.
The one thing that I absolutely loved about this game is you do all of these combats, you do all your moves, and then you just resolve all the combats that are on the board.
Yeah.
And those things matter more than just did I capture this territory or not. Because all of your losses get stacked up on this morale board.
Also a very good part of the game.
Loved this. Loved this.
Extremely challenging because some places, some countries are going to lose a ton of units.
Yes. So
But
this is your morale board, right? You put all of your units you've lost for the whole turn. You stack them all up, and they all have a value.
Yep.
And then you calculate based on the value, add them all up. This is how much stress your country takes, and you can offset stress with civilian goods or medals that you've won from capturing materials. Civilian goods are very expensive. You have to buy them, pre-plan them, basically.
But I almost feel like they're very important if you're going to lose a lot of units.
But a lot of countries can't afford that.
That's true.
Quite simply. So
as the U.S., I bought several, and as Japan, I bought one because I had a little extra money a couple times.
But basically, whatever it ends up with, you end up with a pile of stress here.
Yeah.
And you have your stress thresholds, which are different for each country, which I also appreciate.
Which was very cool.
And once you start taking X number of stress, you cross your threshold. There's this little track in the middle of the board. Your country's basically condition starts to degrade.
Their morale,
basically
in essence,
permanently lose resources.
Yep.
You'll permanently lose the capacity to use your port advantages.
To use a certain number, you lose a certain number of orders.
You lose a full row of orders.
Yep.
You go from 9 to 6 or from 6 to 3.
Devastating.
You stop being able to use your supply lines. Like, just so much stuff and it's all cumulative and happens to you every turn.
Yep.
So it was
mass desertions was my favorite, although no one ever really got to that point.
No, it was close though.
Yeah.
But yeah, how your country degrades over time if you're taking tons of losses.
Very well modeled, I think, in this little... I thought. The only comment I had was some of those values, I thought, ooh, those are... to call the American Playboys a 4, that bothered me.
Well...
But I'm an American.
They're not supposed to lose so many units. It's a big part of it.
And also they're a democracy where people are like, I'm not sending my son to fight for this because he's going to die. Those kinds of things are very well modeled in this. Nazi Germany's like, well, you're going to send your sons no matter what.
Well, yeah.
So we're hardier.
And the propaganda's hardcore.
Yeah,
they're not hearing about all the losses.
Very well done. I just think there's a lot of little systems that were the combat, the recruiting, the orders, the morale, just very cool, very well integrated, and frankly makes a very playable experience.
Yeah.
Long.
Very long,
but
yes.
very playable. I had a great time.
Yes. Now, we also played with the Jumbo expansion,
The commander
which
sticks.
has the little command sticks.
Which, frankly, the novelty of was better than the functionality. I felt like I couldn't really use them because the units were so close together. But we still used them a couple of times.
But the units aren't close together enough where you can just move them with your finger. It's no big deal.
It's true. It's true.
They're cute, but
Yeah.
we had them out. The UK player used it more because their units are spread out.
Well, they were moving mainly boats and a couple of stacks.
But they actually have to reach across the board.
Yeah, they do.
Because they're the US is kind of like, I'm here, so I'm going to sit here and move my units. No big deal. They also have the dry erase board orders.
Yep.
We didn't use those. I just think the paper ones are just easier.
Yeah.
Less messy. But the extra set of dice was nice. Really, really liked it.
I mean, we
used the drinks coasters.
Those were fantastic!
Because it's an all-day game. You're going to want to have drinks. And we had drinks, and a drinks coasters. Great ad. Loved it.
Yeah, I was laughing at first, but after using them, I'm like... And then we played Virgin Queen afterwards, and I'm like, where's my drink coaster?
Everyone was like, oh yeah,
I don't have a drink
where's the
coaster.
drinks coasters?
Yeah, but lots to like in that big expansion, or big... What do they call that?
It's the Jumbo Pack expansion. It's got a big neoprene mat. We didn't use it only because it adds an extra little border around it, which makes it even a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
The table just wasn't big enough for it.
And I actually thought that circle map was very cool. So, and then it also, I don't know, the combination of the components and the gameplay really made for a good experience. I think that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, it's not the most serious hardcore of games,
Yeah.
right? It's pretty serious in your time commitment.
Yeah.
But you sit here, you play an enjoyable game, chuck a bunch of dice. There are some stand-up moments. There are some absolute moments where you roll a ton of dice and you do nothing, and everyone's like, or you wipe everything, and it's like, oh,
yeah.
Just some really cool moments like that, and doing the orders. That's
great.
That was my favorite part of it, and that's what this game is, right? You're gonna have an enjoyable time with your friends, sat around a big table for a long time.
Yeah.
And sure, there's some ahistoric, weird interactions and bits and pieces,
but it all works together. So in
a game this big, it's gonna happen.
Well, and that was also something some people are like, we got to change this, and I'm like, no, we don't change this because there's a ripple effect. You change that, then you got to change something else and change something else because it was all play tested to work together. Let's just live with it. Let's have a good time and figure out how to overcome it.
Yes.
What about so there's a new Kickstarter coming up.
Yes.
And it has, what was the little expansion called?
So there is a micro expansion, which they already released.
Okay.
Like, you could get, it was like $2.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's going to be included in the
second edition.
In this new printing. And it's like subs and convoys. You get these little two-sided tokens. One is a convoy sunk marker, and one's a submarine marker. And what those do is, in this one where you hit up those convoy spaces, you would reduce someone's resources.
Oh, their OSR or their
whatever
oil
it was.
or
Yeah,
their
you'd reduce
iron.
their resources by that much. With the micro expansion, you also put the convoy marker on the morale track.
It's a casualty.
It counts as a casualty, whereas normally it doesn't. It's just you're just losing resources. Now you're losing resources and taking a small morale hit too.
Well, the losses to the Merchant Marine were just as devastating as losses on the battlefield.
If anything worse.
Yeah, because you
there
can't
was
get what
so
you needed.
So many members of Merchant Marines were killed in the war. It was,
when you can't get
crazy.
Beans and bullets, you can't fight. So therefore, that affects morale just as much as a lost battle.
Well, and it incentivizes you more to do the convoy attacks, which was something that we didn't do a lot of.
Because, like you said, there wasn't necessarily as much of an incentive. Losing one or two units, or one or two OSR or oil, or it's like, that's bad.
But I spent orders to do that, and the orders are your precious resource.
So with those changes, maybe the Germans would have been doing more of that.
And the little sub side of the counter means that when your subs dive to escape combat, you can slip them into an adjacent C zone.
So they become free.
So that way they're not just in that same space and they're pinned next turn because there's a battleship fleet on the surface and they can't get out. So I actually really like that change.
Yeah.
If you can get them to escape, they actually do escape, and they're not just going to be killed next turn instead.
So that's something we need to maybe try next time. But that Kickstarter second edition, that's included, and I'm sure they're going to do things like errata changes or...
Yeah.
But That's coming up.
Whatever little updates that they've made over the year or so.
I think that's coming up soonish.
Is it June?
Yeah, June of 2021. So, yeah. Anyway, that's something to look forward to. I would love to have this game on my shelf, frankly.
Well, you need to buy a whole new shelf for it because it's so big.
Yeah. I've already got shelves that are screaming at me for all the games piled up on top of them.
So, here's the real question. War Room, did it live up to your expectations?
Did it live up to my expectation? I would say yes.
I would agree with that too.
And I would even say more so, because I guess I just didn't know that I would be that engaged in it.
For us to be not only that engaged in it for that long is what was impressive.
And thought about it all night and thought, boy, I'd love to just play this the next day as well.
We talked about this game all weekend, even though we were playing other games too.
What and isn't that the hallmark of a good design? That
yes,
you continually think about it, you continually discuss it. And even though we played other great games like Virgin Queen from GMT Games, I had this game on my brain a lot.
Yeah.
And I think I made the statement afterwards, I'm really glad we played this and I cannot wait to play it again.
Yeah.
So to me, yes, it lived up to my expectations and probably even exceeded them.
Yeah, I wanted a big, massive, grand strategy game where I felt like I was the overall commander of a nation, and for the game to also be eminently playable whilst long. It is that, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't get bogged down in minutia.
Mm-hmm.
It really doesn't. The turns are very well structured. What you're doing isn't massively complicated.
No.
And as such, you know, you're making progress. You're doing a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're making the decisions between bidding for initiative or saving my resources to buy units. What units do I buy? You've got choices,
Yeah.
but
you know kind of what
know
you need to do.
what
Yeah.
you're trying to do at least. But it feels like you're in a war room playing
Yeah.
a big, massive game like that.
No fighting in the war room,
Yes.
gentlemen.
And I cannot overstate how much I liked the order system.
Yeah, it was great.
It was so fun because we
Yeah.
don't play a lot of games that have that.
We don't.
There are a few out there, but that was so cool.
Well, it added, like I said earlier, a sense of realism that I am making decisions from 2,000 miles away, and it takes time to do that, and I don't have unlimited resources.
Yeah, you're acting on your current intelligence.
Yep.
And if you don't go first, your intelligence will be old by the time your units implement their orders.
Therefore, your moves aren't necessarily as effective.
And I loved that. I think that is such a cool aspect of this game.
Well, and one more comment about that. The guessing of what your opponent is trying to do to then put your units in position to take advantage of that is glorious. That is glorious.
Because we'd have like a little 10-minute strategy session with our allies, and then we'd all come back in and write down our orders, and it'd be 6 old men sat around a table just groaning.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
So good.
And so many times, we would all do our orders independently, and then as they're being read out, you're like, ooh, I see that coming, and bam, it happened. You know?
Or even between allies, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, right. Why did you not do what we said we were going to do?
Like, you didn't say you were going to do that.
There were a couple times, though, that one of my allies, they made a move that I thought, ooh, that was not discussed, but that was cagey.
Yeah.
And it worked out really well. So I like that part. We could go on and on.
Yes, this is a big game. We could talk about it for a long time. But yeah, there's a big Kickstarter coming up in a couple months' time, so keep your eye out for that. This is War Room, a Larry Harris game.
From Nightingale Games.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's available on Kickstarter, and then you might be able to get it on their website. This thing sells out like hotcakes pretty quickly.
And it should. It's worthy of that.
Yeah, if you've got the time to invest in it, and you want to play this big spectacle at a big convention, or you got a dedicated group, it's fun. Very enjoyable. There's a lot to like here.
Yeah, I agree.
So appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.